Hello, I'm Brian Bush from the Marlowe team, and I'm going to walk through an example of a geolocated smart contract that uses both Marlowe and Cardano Beam. So it's really using two dApps, building on the strength of each app. Cardano Beam gives you geolocation and geography-based retrieval and placement of tokens. Marlowe gives you complex contract logic. So I thought I'd try to combine these and see what we can do with them. So the first thing I'd like to just point out, we have a couple links here. There's a web application for Cardano Beam where you can place tokens, native tokens, at geographic locations. And then an Android app that lets you retrieve them. We'll see a little bit more of this later. I'm using the Eternal wallet for the Light wallet in this example. We use an ADA handle to provide some identity and uniqueness to the retrieval of the tokens. Marlowe Playground is used to design the contract, and then we're using Marlowe CLI to actually run the contract on the Marlowe side on chain. And then Cardano CLI is just for querying and things like that of the blockchain. So this contract, we've tried to keep it simple so we can really look at the synergies between these two dApps instead of making a really complicated contract. This combination supports a lot of different use cases, but the one we're talking about here is really the basic one. So we have one party, which we're just calling Faucet. They create a Marlowe contract and they're going to fund it. And then another party is being called Beamer here, and they're going to redeem the funds based on the rules of geography and of Marlowe. And so the scenario really is we're going to build a contract in Marlowe Playground, and it's a contract that will give you 75 ADA if you possess three tokens, Globe, Swan, and Bear Garden. We're going to place those geographically using the Cardano Beam app. Then we'll create the contract, put the ADA in it, so it's waiting. And then we'll let the other party, the Beamer, know that they can go out and retrieve those tokens. Once they've retrieved the tokens, they can actually use them to authorize Marlowe transactions that release the 75 ADA. So since we're doing this on the blockchain, we want to go through a few preliminaries first. It's always good to just record versions of things. So if we look at this later, we'll know exactly which versions of software we used. We're going to use the mainnet. So we're setting that up with the node socket and the network magic flag. And then we have a folder that's storing the various keys that we're going to be using. And the faucet in particular has a payment signing key and the mainnet address. So that kind of gets us started with some of those basics. And then just for simplicity, we're going to use a couple of numeric constants here, the current time and some time and date conversions. So the contract, as I mentioned, is just a simple deposit, authorization, and payout. So here we are in Marlowe Playground. And what we're doing here, we're using Blockly. You could easily write this in JavaScript or Haskell or any other language that can output JSON in the right format for Marlowe contracts, but the visual representation of Blockly is nice for this. So there's a deposit by the faucet, which has a public key. So this is the address that's depositing 75 ADA. And that's going to sit in the contract until the redemption is authorized. So how do we redeem this? In Marlowe, the possession of a role token lets you make a choice or make a deposit. So what we're going to do here is require the owner of the Globe token to make a choice. It's just the number 0. Same for the owner of the Swan token. Same for the owner of the Bear Garden token. We're going to have just one person involved who will gather all these tokens, but you could have 3 different people gather them. But these tokens are not going to be distributed at the beginning of the Marlowe contract, as is usually done, but they're going to be geocached, and then they have to be fetched and retrieved. And basically, anyone who's authorized to retrieve them would be authorized to be a party in this contract. So you could use contracts and the geolocation for things like scavenger hunts, token drops, geocaching, things like that. So all this is doing here, these three choices are just proofs that a particular person has the three tokens involved. Now, once they've proved that they have the tokens, then the contract just pays out the funds, and it gives a third of the funds, 25 ADA, to the possessors of each token. So if the same person possessed all three tokens, then they would get three payments of 25 ADA. If you had a game where three people were collecting these, then they would each get their fair share. And the nice thing about the Marlowe contract is it enforces certain safety. So let's say no one finds the geocaching. There are timeouts here. So the funds will be released back to the original depositor if somehow the geolocation stuff doesn't happen. And you can also do things like enforce order or enforce splits. You could do very complex logic in a Marlowe contract. With Cardano Beam, you can build simple logic into the sequence of picking up tokens, but Marlowe goes a little bit beyond that. So anyway, that is the contract in Blockly form. And then, as always, you can click Send to Simulator and download as JSON, and then you can actually get a nice JSON representation of this contract. So we're going to now create it here in our Jupyter notebook. So we're going to say deposit 75 ADA. We're giving it the names of the tokens here. And then I downloaded that from Blockly and then edited it. And basically, I wanted to have some variables I could plug in values here. So this is not literally what we downloaded, but it's very close to it. But we're going to create the contract. And then you can see the JSON that this turns into. And then Marlowe, when you're starting off creating a contract, it needs to start with an initial state. And in this case, we're just putting 2 ADA, which is a good min UTXO requirement for a contract like this. We're just putting that in the faucet account. So that's a really simple starting state. Now, role tokens. Often in Marlowe, we mint role tokens when we create the contract, but you don't have to do that. You can have custom minting policies, and you can mint tokens separately from the contract. And they don't have to be distributed to the participants right away. They can be distributed through other channels, as in this example. But there is always a roles currency for a Marlowe contract. And so these are previously minted tokens, and this is the roles currency value. They're right now in an eternal wallet. And one thing to remember, you'll see me using Cardano CLI to print out UTXOs at addresses. For token names, Cardano CLI prints them out in hexadecimal, which is a little bit hard to read. And Marlowe CLI actually uses plain text. So we're just going to make a little correspondence table here. So whenever you see these hexadecimal values and some of the query output, you can know what token it is. And fortunately, these have different numbers of letters. So we have different lengths here, so it's pretty easy to spot these. As I said before, we're going to use some pre-existing tokens. So we have this globe token. I'm displaying it in the Eternal wallet here. And we have a swan token and a bear garden token. And then what we're going to do for some of the logic here is Cardano Beam lets you put in a requirement that in order to pick up the ADA and assets at the geographic location, you have to have a particular token in your wallet. And that's configurable. So I thought we'd use an ADA handle as that token. So here's one, a Christopher Marlowe ADA handle. And we're going to use that for the requirement. And you'll see a little bit more about this later. So all ADA handles currently have the same policy ID. And this is the token name. And so once again, in some of the query output, you're going to see that. And I'm actually going to copy this because we're going to need this in just a second here. So now we're going to open the Cardano Beam app, and we're actually going to place this token. So here's a map in Cardano Beam, and I'm going to put a token right here. This is really near a nice sculpture. And by default, Cardano Beam uses Beam tokens in a particular policy. But we're going to put in this Christopher Marlowe ADA handle token. And you can see Cardano Beam is checking to make sure there's such a token. And then once I type E, you get a nice check mark. So this is basically saying in order to fetch tokens at this location, which is specified up here, you need to be within 50 meters of that location. You need to have a token in this amount with this policy and name in your wallet. And then it has some time constraints. And we're going to say when you redeem it, you get 5 ADA. And we're going to pick the globe token here. So you're going to need to have one globe. You're going to get one globe token and 5 ADA, and you're paying 1 ADA fee. And I'm just going to copy this into our notebook just so we have a record of it for a minute now. And these are the what 3 words, geographic coordinates. Those are kind of handy. Okay, so we just recorded that. And now we're going to submit the transaction. So this is going to open the Eternal Wallet, and we're going to need a spending password. So I actually have to look that up. Paste in the password. And then you can see it's working on things here. It just submitted the transaction to the blockchain. As always, we have to wait for the next block, and we'll see if there's provisional confirmation. Blocks take like 2 seconds to maybe a minute or so to get confirmed. There we go. We have a transaction ID. And then we can actually, we can go query this address. So this is a smart contract address that was just created. And with any luck, we should see, yes, it has 5 ADA. It has that token we deposited, and it is a smart contract. So there's some Babbage datum there that actually has the state of the contract. And I've done this for the 2 other locations, so we're not going to go through that now. You can see that one's there, and then the 3rd token is also there. So we've got 3 geographic locations. They're in different cities nearby, and they each have 5 ADA, and they have one of these 3 roll tokens, and then they have a smart contract that will only release those to the person who holds that Christopher Marlowe ADA handle. So now we're going to actually initialize the Marlowe contract. This is just setting it up, and then we'll submit the transaction for Marlowe. Once again, this takes a little while, depending on the block production rate. But essentially, we're just taking the contract we created and its state, bundling it together in a file that has all the information we need, and then we're giving that to a transaction executor. We can see the transaction executed, and we'll look at the Marlowe validator script, and we can actually see that has 2 ADA now, and this is the datum hash for the contract we just created. Now we're going to deposit 75 ADA, and so we're moving the Marlowe contract forward from basically from step 1 to step 2. We're doing a deposit by the faucet party, and then we give it a validity range. So this is when the transaction is going to occur. So we'll run that, and we have a problem. I was talking too long. So we will give it a more generous time range, I guess. Let's do that. Let's see if this works. There we go. So I had given it a validity range that was only about 10 minutes, and I was talking too much, so we were out of that range. So I just updated it to 20 minutes, and then it ran the transaction. So you always have to be careful with these time ranges. They're necessary for the safety of Marlowe contracts, but uh, they're not something to like just put random numbers in there. You really have to think about what time it is. So here we see at the Marlowe validator address, it now has 77 ADA. So it had the original 2 that was the min ADA or min UTXO requirement, and then the 75 that were deposited. And then we're actually going to have to go out and do some driving and fetch these tokens. So I'll show you that a bit later. But in the meantime, let's take a look at the wallet here. This is going to be the wallet of the person retrieving the tokens. So they have another address. And then at this point, they really just have the Christopher Marlowe token in their wallet. But later on, they will fetch all the tokens from their geographic locations, and then we'll see them in the wallet. So I'm going to pause things here. Now we've traveled to retrieve the tokens. We will take a look. We visited each site, and you can see the Cardano Beam app tells you when you've retrieved a token. Each of these are at sculpture sites. And so we visited those. And then we can actually see that they're in our wallet. So we've got the 3 tokens and the ADA handle. If you look in the internal wallet, you can also see the tokens there. Okay, so now what do we do? Well, now we possess the tokens, so we want to prove ownership of them. So we'll run another Marlowe transaction. We'll reset the clock here because we're going to submit within a time window. Prepare the transaction, submit the transaction, and once again, we have to wait a little bit for it to be confirmed. And then after it's confirmed, we'll just take a look at the state of the contract. So we're actually showing how to make 2 choices at once. We're going to save a little bit of a transaction fee by having 2 of the confirmations of ownership occur together in the same transaction. These could be in separate transactions. There's no problem with that. And the reason we didn't do all 3 of them in the same transaction is that would basically create a big transaction where we're making 3 choices and we're making 4 payments. And that would exceed the Plutus execution cost limits. So we're splitting up the transaction a little bit. You can see that the 2 choices have been made for the globe and the swan token according to the contract. This is the internal state of the contract that's living on chain. And then we're going to just do the proof of the ownership of the Bear Garden token, the 3rd token. And that actually triggers the closure of the contract. So when the contract closes, each of the parties is going to get 25 ADA. And then the creator of the contract gets their 2 ADA back, because remember, they deposited that at the beginning. So if we look at the contract, it's just closed. There's nothing there because the contract is done. And we'll execute this transaction. And so this is basically moving the all the funds into the payout validator address with tags on who's allowed to fetch those funds. So there's going to be 3 UTXOs going out to the payout validator. There's no UTXO going back to the contract address because it's done. So we're going to take a look at the contract address, and we see it's empty. And the payout address, which we're just calculating now, has 3 payments of 25 ADA, and then it's got a datum hash that tells who is actually allowed to retrieve that. And the Beamer party, they still have their roll tokens. So they have all 3 roll tokens. I'm just sort of checking there. And so now these funds are sitting at the payout validator, and we have to actually retrieve them. So we're going to just make 3 quick transactions here to retrieve the funds. And this is like one for each token because, as I mentioned earlier, you might have different people actually owning the roll tokens if it was a cooperative effort to retrieve them geographically. So there's the first transaction. The second one is just in progress now, waiting for a confirmation. And so sometimes this takes a little bit. And then we'll just take a look to see that the funds are retrieved. So the second transaction is done. And then when the third one's done, we'll be able to see what's actually living at the Beamer party's address. And basically everything's all finished. The contract and the Cardano Beam transactions have all completed. So we had actually 6 Cardano Beam transactions, 3 placements and 3 retrievals. And then looks like we had 7 Marlowe transactions in this. And in the end, the funds get dispersed to the person who found the tokens. And you can see here are 3 payments of 25 ADA associated with the 3 roll tokens, just for compactness. These are single UTXOs. And that's it. And we don't really need the roll tokens anywhere. So these are named after theaters from Christopher Marlowe's time, the Swan Theater, the Globe Theater, and the Bear Garden Theater. And I think I'm going to geolocate these 3 tokens in London at the appropriate places. So I'll make it easy if folks want to try to pick them up, or either by going there, or you can spoof your GPS address and try that if you want. So thank you.